Welcome to the CyberBytes podcast. I'm your host, Joseph Cooper, co-founder of Aspiron Search, a niche, solely focused cybersecurity search firm. This week's guest, we've got Mike Privette, CISO at Passport and VC advisor. I have known Mike for some time now, and I'm super stoked to have him on as our first guest on the pod. We're going to deep dive into Mike's background and his track to CISO, as well as discuss all the active contributions to the infosec community and all the hats he wears outside of the office. I hope you enjoy. First things first, how are you, brother?
Hey, just good. Good to have me on the show, and thanks for the invite.
Nah, absolutely. Pleasure's all mine, my man. Pleasure's all mine. I saw you flew up to New York last week for the Blue and Link Ventures dinner that we co-sponsored with JP's. How was it?
Yeah, it was great. It was a great event, really small gathering, great French restaurants, a very cool atmosphere. And it was small enough you could actually interact with people and
nice.
Like in here or out. So that was really nice.
Awesome. Well, look, so for all about guests, Mike, I'm going to be sort of going right back to where it all began, to get into the industry, to sort of where you've all the way to the journey of where you've got to being a CISO at Passport. I guess we can go as far back as to being a developer for that small short period, if you want. But yeah, how did it all begin for you?
Yeah, it kind of begun in a way that was different than like a lot of other like people who are starting out in the field now. Like there was no cybersecurity degree. There was barely a field of cybersecurity. The only really way you got into cybersecurity was by way of IT, and it was just something else you kind of did on the side. But it didn't have anywhere near the amount of the focus that it did today. But I came in like undergrad. I did management information systems, which is basically like computer science light and business light combined together. And I got my first job doing some development work for like the School of Business that I went to, just like helping lower class students with programming questions. And then I pivoted into public accounting, which is where the whole journey kind of began. I started my career about the same time that Sarbanes-Oxley hit the world, an Enron scandal. So everyone was like, oh my gosh, these IT systems move money, and they can hide money too. Or they can hide bad transactions. And so I spent most of my first 2 years out of school doing consulting of like that type of work and audits and IT audits of all types. And I kind of got a specialty into banking in that area, being in the Charlotte area, lots of banks nearby.
Yep.
So I got a specialty in that. And then 2008 stock market or housing crash, I actually got laid off. A lot of people don't know that, but I got laid off during the Great Recession, as my kids call it now. But I was very fortunate to land at another bank doing external like vendor security assessments. And that was a pretty pivotal role. Like one, I was young and I got to travel the world to go to different sites and understand how different companies were using the bank's data or processing something on the bank's behalf. So I learned a ton about how processes work, how critical systems work, and then how different companies operated. And then after that role, I was a bit tired of asking questions, and I said, hey, I want to push buttons. I'd rather do that instead. And so that was kind of a pivot into banking still, but it was in more of an engineering role. And so I jokingly tell people that I audited my way into engineering, and then that backed my way into security. But it's not a traditional path. Even back then, it wasn't traditional. But that's where I started, and that's where I started getting a lot deeper on building systems, maintaining systems, understanding, always with an eye towards auditing and compliance and reliability, because I worked in banks, heavily regulated, heavily scrutinized, in everything they did. So that was a key kind of pivotal role for me, making that engineering leap. And then from the engineering standpoint, that's when I basically just kind of leveled up on engineering after that. So I just kept trying to go senior engineer to architect to just keep going higher and higher in that realm. And then engineering kind of remained a core focus of my career until then I got my first people manager job, led my first team. And then I went on again to another bank to then build out a whole program of teams, so multiple teams. I was managing managers who were managing teams. And then somewhere along the way, I went to business school because I said I wanted to get like a different perspective, because I'd been so focused in technology, so focused in engineering. I think it was probably worth it for me to just do something a bit different than what the rest of the people I was, looking up to or aspiring to be like did. Many of them had just followed the technical trail all the way up. And so I said, it's probably good for me to know some of this business stuff. And so I went and did an MBA while I still had a full-time job, and I just started a family. I don't recommend that, by the way, if anybody does that. Like, it's really stressful for everybody.
I was going to say, how was that?
I would say it's terrible. My wife would say it's like even worse.
Yeah.
But it was a good experience, just because it made me think very differently than how I was thinking prior to that. And this is what actually started the entrepreneurial itch in my head. And I thought, well, how can I use my years of security experience, but also add some entrepreneurial flair to it, or get closer to startups, or get closer to that world where I can see things moving faster. And so that kind of led me down the path of eventually starting my own consulting business pre-COVID. And, it's funny because I started the business like in November 2019. And then I got my first client on the side while I still had my day job. And then COVID happened. Then I thought, well, that was kind of fun. Maybe I'll pick this up later or whatever. And then, much to my surprise, it actually took off because of COVID. A lot of people wanted small, short bursts of like consulting work. And so I said, hey, I can do that in the margins. And I did that. And then it took off to the point where I actually ended up selling it to another like group of like family office and, a small office backed founders. And then I then took a sidestep out of the banking world and then helped this company stand up like a managed security services business. Got that started, profitable, running. And then that leads me all the way up to then now Passport was one of that company's customers. So then Passport said, hey, we're going to go, try to go big and go IPO one day. Will you come start a program for us and run that? And so I said, yeah, sure. I'll give that a shot. So that's very long-winded, but that's
I love that. Cool. Well, we've known each other a little while now, Mike, and I didn't know any of that backstory, so it's been good to actually learn a little bit about you, man. First things first, obviously picking at it, obviously being laid off. Right now, it's sort of all over LinkedIn. We're seeing thousands of layoffs across tech. So would you say that was probably one of the biggest hurdles in your career to date?
It was, I never expected to get laid off. I mean, like I was, it's my first job out of college. So aside from like being shocked and like, embarrassed, I was like, oh man, this is going to change everything. I think if there was any silver lining to be had in that, it's that so many other people got laid off too, just like now. It wasn't hard to pitch myself at the next job. Like I didn't have to explain too much. I'm like, well, I was just part of a massive layoff. A couple hundred people got laid off on the same day. It is what it is. And so then I could just focus on like what I could do for the next company. So it was a very pivotal role. And I was very lucky to be in a field that was still within demand, and I could still pivot kind of closely in the audit or security space. And so that was hard to, for a lot of people who didn't have that kind of background. But I was very lucky. And like, I wish I could say that I like planned it all, but it was total. Like you can't take out the random chance in this world on that stuff. But, it was a very, very pivotal moment to help me land the next role.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess another thing that I took from that background of yours is that you mentioned that you then went into an engineering focus. As a CISO, obviously, you're sort of like the unicorn being a technical CISO these days. How did you remain technical whilst then managing? Because you mentioned that you managed managers. How did you manage to do that?
It wasn't easy, and truthfully, it's not something you can do at every company, because typically the higher you go up, the less you deal with the tech, the more you deal with personalities, or sometimes I like to say lack thereof, and then it's all about like influence and persuasion and timing and budgeting, all of those things. Like you can't ignore those things, but if you can then still stay close enough to the tech and get some people who can trust, who can go super deep. and give you the real shake of this and say like, all right, is this for real? Is this worth our time? Or should we spend more? Should we spend less? And so like building up that kind of trusted network of people that you can either take with you or bring with you to new places, I think is a huge aspect because then so much, you don't have to explain or have to go too deep on knowing whether or not it's the right technical fit. And then you can then take your time to get roadblocks out of their way to let them go deep and wide as they need to go. But truthfully, it's people need to think about careers as like a swinging pendulum, right? So like at some points in your career, you're going to need to be all the way on the tech side. And then other times in your career, you're going to need to be sort of in the middle, be able to talk to both sides. And then sometimes you're going to need to be just like super polished on like the executive presidents or the presidents and, that aspect of it. But good careers, in my opinion, are based on your ability to transition between those roles as needed. So when I was at one of my companies, I had a very young team, meaning like many of them were entry level talent. So there was a lot to learn. And I had just come off like a team lead role where I was like the lead technical person and then also had some management responsibilities as well. So I was already in the mode of teaching, documenting, and like getting people up to speed. And so I put in a lot of work as well as managing a lot of the work. So it's no easy feat to have one foot in both worlds, but sometimes you have to. And then once you can get them up and rolling and you can get them doing stuff that well beyond what you can do, which I think is probably one of the coolest parts about being a manager is being able to like see others go way further than you would have ever thought, even for yourself.
Completely agree.
But like once you get that going, then like you can then like focus on higher level strategic things and keep it going like that. But it's one of those things you have to like kind of actively work out. So you need to have the executive presence. You need to have the polish. You need to be able to make PowerPoints because people got to make PowerPoints. That's how companies talk. But you still have to know when to call bluff or like say somebody, go to someone and say, is it really this big of a deal? Or can we do it differently? Or can you explain how we can kind of leapfrog this problem and focus on the next big problem?
Got it. How did you find the transition from FS financial service to a tech business like a fintech? How did that feel and how was it? Was you the first security hire at Passport coming in, or was there a security function there? Was it a complete build from scratch? How was that?
Yeah, so I was the first official security hire, like by position. Luckily, like the founding team, the founding CTO, he's a rock star and he had great abilities to make like really resilient and really good services. So like they had already done a lot of foundational work, but there was kind of no structure and there was no like program mapping or guidance. And then all the audit functions and all the compliance functions were super manual, very reactive, very kind of disorganized, based on whatever they could get away with on the auditor on sometimes. And so I had to go back to that pendulum where I had to wear both hats very quickly. So I needed to be able to take a look at our AWS infrastructure and say, okay, here's what I think needs to be improved. Here's what I think need to change. But then I also need to go pitch, like buying something, managing a budget, making the business case and the roadmap for our executive team and for our board and say, here's why I'm suggesting we do what we do. Here's how I'm going to use your capital. Here's what you get from that. And so it's a constant like hat switching exercise, which is truthfully the funnest part. For me anyway. But I don't think it would have been as successful had I not done that sides quest, as I call it, for this consulting business, where I got to talk to a lot of small companies, tech companies and otherwise, that just needed help creating programs and they didn't know where to start. They knew they needed something, but they couldn't afford to pay the $500K for like an Ernst & Young or a Deloitte to come in and tell them, here's a PowerPoint of why you need to hire us again. So I got used to operating low and then pulling back up to explain why I operated low. And that's a really cool experience that you honestly don't get at a lot of like big companies. You don't get the ability to swing back and forth. And but it was something that I think is really important if you get the chance to do it. Like I encourage people to give it a shot because you'll leapfrog your experience in that way.
Yeah, got it. So look, segueing on the wearer of many hats, we we know that that's definitely you, mate. So obviously you're like a VC advisor for a couple of venture capital businesses. Can you just tell us a little bit more about that role and what that actually means?
Yeah. So this role kind of came about when I made my first consulting business. Yeah, I kind of had two arms to the same business. Like, so one was like virtual consulting, or VCISO is the term as they call it, to small businesses, and then the other side of that coin was talking to venture capital companies, because where startups are, VCs are, and so I kind of got the introduction to that world by way of an accelerator program here in Charlotte called Queen City FinTech. Now it's called RevTech Labs. But I got the ability to talk to startup founders trying to often sell their products and services to large banks.
Mm-hmm.
And then I got to explain like kind of how it worked. Like, here's how you get onboarded as a vendor. And that always kind of went on to then be introduced to their VC-backed founders, and then the VC firms themselves. And then what I realized is like that, I have a lot of opinions, apparently, a lot of strong opinions. I've spent, so many years buying software and hardware and then living with it, the technology ramifications, which I think is like a piece you don't hear a lot of, is like, hey, I bought this and then I lived with it and it wasn't as good as I thought. Or somebody else bought this and I had to put it in and live with it and make it good. That aspect is not often talked about. And so like, I would basically share my learnings about that with VC firms, which then turned into like me helping them understand technical concepts of like, well, here is identity and access management. Here's why it's hard in big companies. Or here's why regulators focus on this over that. And that turned into like kind of a ongoing advisory business for a few firms, where I'd either help them with due diligence for specific companies, or I'd even help them more broadly understand like a specific product category space. So like, what is attack surface management and how is it different than other things? Mm-hmm. And so it turned into like basically research exercises for me, which was a lot of fun. I like writing, I like researching. So that was something I just figured out that other VCs also valued. So I just decided to make it a full-time thing.
Got you. And is this how the newsletters has then evolved? Security Funded. They're really keen to learn how that all came about.
Yeah. So my marketing strategy for my first consulting business was content-driven marketing. So my goal was, I didn't want to spend that money on ads. I didn't want to just talk to random people that I didn't know. I wasn't trying to serve the world. I was trying to write blog posts and content, like thought leadership-esque type pieces, to attract people and then be able to point back to something and say like, oh, here's a piece I wrote on this. Here's why I can help you with your program or help you with your investing or something like that. And then I started writing it for that group. And then once I started actually working with the VCs, I kind of found myself explaining concepts again and again. And I'm very much like a lazy engineer thinking. I'm like, I don't want to have to explain this again. I'm going to write it down once so I can send it to you. Yeah. And so then it clarifies my own thinking. And then it's like something to always refer back to that I can keep updating. And so I started writing the newsletter for that group at first. Mm-hmm. And then they were like, hey, you should really send this out to other people. And so I started like just posting it on returnonsecurity.com. Mm-hmm. And then I kept thinking about other ways, like what would help me and help others be like more situationally aware in this industry when it comes to like how many puts and takes and how many funding rounds and how much activity is going on in the cybersecurity market. Nobody's tracking that. I wonder if I just tracked it and if people would like that. Mm. And so that's kind of how Security Funded evolved. Like I posted a couple tweets and I was like, one like and I'll do it again. And I got one like that wasn't just mine. Yeah. And so I did it again, and then I did it again, and I kept getting a little bit of feedback. And then I said, well, I guess I'm going to email people this. And that sort of started the snowball effect of Security Funded. Yeah.
Awesome. How many subs have you got now? Like how long have you been running Security Funded? I know obviously you've got a new newsletter as well, which you're pushing out, Secure the Job.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so Security Funded, almost 2 years. It'll be 2 years it'll be 100 issues in July. But I'm coming up on 2 years working on that. Just passed like 1,650 this morning, nice. Subscribers. So it's been slow growth, and then it just sort of, as it goes on, I collect them faster. And I'm always impressed that people who are discovering it and find it useful. Like I love hearing that. Because that's kind of the whole goal for writing it.
Yeah, we're huge fans here at Aspron. We're pushing out and as you can see from me, we're in the swag. But I appreciate you sending that through. So Secure the Job's the newest newsletter. Keen to get that plugged as well. So what's that?
Yeah.
How did that
Secure the Job? So this one's like another spin on the newsletter concept. I found people like newsletters. Newsletters broadly are kind of having a big moment, as they say right now. And I think that's because it's so hard to get attention online because so many people are pushing attention, seeking content, some of it good, some of it not good, probably most of it not good. So I wanted to experiment with a medium I already knew, newsletters, with getting something a little more targeted for people because, as you know, because you staff our industry, so much. So many people looking for jobs, so many job openings, can't fill the jobs, and there's so much noise and churn and hype around requirements and salary. So it's and it's a still very trust-based community. So it's hard to kind of know where to follow and where to find the right job, especially if you're getting started or trying to make your next career pivot. So I thought, well, if I just kind of smartly pivot or partner with a few people, a few companies, a few recruiting firms that I like, and just sort of highlight a few jobs here and there, it'll be a little bit more consumable for people to take on, and then they can say, "Oh, this is easy. I like this idea. I'm interested in engineering roles or sales roles or leadership type roles," and they can find something for them without having to go broadly search for it and sift through everything. It's just curated list. Here you go.
Yeah, nice. Absolutely love that. So I know you've been posting recently around some of the lessons learned for writing a newsletter. Just for anyone that is going to listen to this and think, hey, I'm interested in pushing out a newsletter. Maybe not all 4 lessons, but what's one of the biggest pieces of advice you'll give someone?
Honestly, I think the hardest piece, or the biggest piece of advice, is don't set out to make money doing it. It's far better to set out to be consistent on a topic you'd love to learn more about. So say you'd love to learn more about a certain field, and you just want to know, how do you approach the field? What is the field all about? And then see how deep you can go and how consistent you can be with writing about a topic or a series of topics you like, because the consistency aspect of it is what makes it successful. It took, for my own newsletters, it took me over a year to get past 1,000 subscribers, but then from 1,000 to 1,500 was 2 months. And so it goes really quickly only after you've had the compound effect of consistency and writing, long enough. And, not all the content's going to be a banger or a home run, but you have to keep consistently doing it and showing up when you say you would.
Yeah.
And so I'd say start with that in mind. But then also think about, you have to be aware of who else your audience is consuming that may be similar. So, and this is probably the harder part, is that there's so much content that's similar in the world. How do you find the ones that you can add your own unique experience to, or own unique voice to, that isn't already being covered another way? So you have to think about not just what you write about, but how you're going to deliver it, and what makes your point of view slightly different or even better in some cases than others. So you have to test, you have to play around to see how that works. So social media is a great place to test. You can live or die by the likes, so you can say, okay, people didn't like that. Rewrite it, try something different, see if you get a little bit more engagement. And then similar, you can then go deeper on stuff that people do like. So that's probably what I'd recommend if you're just thinking about starting in one today.
Got ya. Cool. So consistency is key. Awesome.
Mm-hmm.
But look, Mike, absolute pleasure to have you on the pod. Really enjoyed the episode. I guess the final, to close it out, or what would be your advice for someone that is looking to get to that CISO role similar to yourself?
I'll say the CISO role is it's an interesting one, and there's many ways you can get there. My advice would probably be, think about why you want the CISO role, because because I would say it's probably not as glamorous as people have made it out to be in their heads. And think about like what will it get you, or in your own estimation, like what will it enable you to do, and then what do you envision like a CISO doing? Because if you look at like if you work at a company today and you work for a CISO and you think, oh, I could do that, there may be some truth to that, but there's probably a lot more involved in the job than you might think. That's probably not fun. A lot of CISO jobs are not that fun from time to times. But I would say another piece is like, you can always go smaller, and you'll have a higher chance of going smaller than you will necessarily, slogging at a bank for 30 years and hoping you one day get the chance to, apply to be the CISO. That's not going to happen for most people. And especially the bigger the company, the more likely the company is to go outside to find their next key executive hire. Because big companies, old companies, established companies like sure bets. They don't like experimenting. So your best bet is to like find a smaller role, find the one you can take a little more ownership, but find one that's still like close to kind of your niche and your areas of like strengths, and lean into that.
Awesome advice, Mike. Pleasure having you on, my man. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me.